See how loud I am. Not so loud. I'm actually going to crank up. Ooh, baby. Yeah. There we go. Actually, it's a different sound than that. That's the classic feedback sound. This was the waterfall sound. Let's see if I can replicate it. No, I can't. And I'm not going to try anymore because I don't like the way it sounds. Okay, so this is what I thought we could do. If you have a Bible or a cell phone or something that you can look at the Bible with, I thought that because our readings were so short this past week and because the resurrection is a thing that we all know about, that we could spend a bunch of time talking about what it means, but we're going to do that in the coming weeks. I thought we would just take a look at the four Gospels' presentation of what actually happened at the resurrection and how they differ, and just enjoy that together, because it very much is so like it sometimes is referred to as the synoptic problem, that these three Gospels that are looking at the same thing, looking together, sin together, seeing together, right? Synoptic Gospels, that's what we call Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Then we've got John, who, it is 420. So John was high on something when he wrote his gospel. But the other three are very, very similar to one another in a whole lot of ways. They share a bunch of material, but John is an odd beast. At the same time, they are very similar, but they're not exactly the same, right? It very much is like if all of us saw something happen and were asked about it later, how would we report upon it? It would not be, actually, if you talk to law enforcement, if somebody's story is exactly detail for detail the same, you should be very suspicious, right? They talked about it beforehand, and this is something is fishy. And so you would expect for these different accounts, for varying reasons, to be just a little different, and indeed they are. So let's look at Matthew 28 first. This was Resurrection Week. So if you go to the big picture, tpcfm.org/big picture, it is Easter week. So the
Jesus brought before Pilate. Okay. This one? Week 28?
Yes,
okay.
That's the one. I think. That might be a week too early. I'm not sure.
Is that the week 21 then?
Oh no.
It's not the Acts one.
No, not the Acts one.
The one before?
The one before. Yep. Resurrection. The readings are very short. Maybe, because I think I overlapped some of that on the week before too. So we got some of this twice. But we're going to look at Matthew 28. First of all, before we do that, Matthew does have a strange detail. And this is what I really am intending to point out to you, is the things that are not uniform. Matthew is the only gospel that has this one very strange detail, and that is in Matthew 27:52, that says that, verse 51, at that moment when Jesus breathes his last, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, right? And this is really symbolic. This is, by the way, this is not just like a drape that you have on this puppy is like 6 inches thick, okay? And this is the curtain between the Holy of Holies, the holiest place in Judaism, and the sort of the holy place that's the antechamber out of it. So that rips in two, and some people think that means that now we have access to God, and some people think that means that God is now released from his confines. I think it works both ways. There's poetry there. At any rate, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. The earth shook, the rocks were split. So there's an earthquake, and then the tombs were also opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised, and after his resurrection, they came out of their tombs and entered the holy city and appeared to many. Seriously. Because it's not a resurrection in the same way that Jesus is raised. This is just like a resuscitation for a minute. And they walk around and appear to people. We don't know that they say anything. But like,
And what did they do after that?
died again, I guess, like poor Lazarus, right? Poor Lazarus gets to be raised from the dead, and then the poor guy has to die again. What a bummer.
Is there any archaeological evidence that happened?
Zero. But like, none of the other gospels mention this. It's just so strange that is worth like, what? I guess, I don't know. I like to think about it like, holy moly, this is like I like to think about it in the same way that I think about creation, right? That God didn't have to create anything, but it was out of like the superabundance of God's love that he essentially like, it was like me with the candle on Good Friday, right? Like he's got a cup full of love and it just spills over, and that spilling over is the act of creation so that God creates something with which he can share his love, right? I like to think about this in those same terms, that it's like the resurrection power of God was so great that what was happening in this one random tomb in Jerusalem was actually happening all around Jerusalem, because it was just, this was coursing through the catacombs of the holy city, and it couldn't be stopped. But I think it's largely symbolic again. I'm not sure that there's a whole lot here. I haven't ever heard anybody preach a sermon on this, but challenge to me for next year, I guess. Right, Godwin? Yes.
Yeah, no sermons on that. Just like he said,
No.
to many. Who are the many?
Well, I think it's just, again, another proof of like,
Wrote that down. That's kind of
you'd have imagined, right? It's remarkable. This is the sort of thing that you'd think, hi Dave, hi Sherry, you'd think would be like grabbed up by all three of them, all three of the synoptics. It's a very strange thing. But
Have this, 6-inch thick curtain.
mhm.
This door, you would think that there would have been some sort of other historical references to it as well,
Right.
because it would be so phenomenal.
That is true. I hadn't really thought about that one. That I always sort of take for granted, like, oh, this neat thing happened. Here's another way to look at that. Look at the raising of the dead around Jesus. We're looking at all of the resurrection stories in the Gospels just to sort of enjoy them and how different they are and what they might be speaking individually. But I pointed out the fact that in Matthew there are people raised from the dead, resuscitated, like the saints, the bodies. It says the bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised, and they walk around town after Jesus is raised from the dead, and then we don't hear from them again. But here's the other thing, right, is, I feel like I say this all the time, so you can tell me if you've never really heard me say this, but what happened in Jesus, like if this is the course of history, and by the way, Judaism is one of the only, like the Judeo-Christian like theology writ large is one of the only theologies in the multiplicity of religious frameworks that has a linear time and doesn't have a loop, which is interesting to me. At any rate, if this is time and creation happens here, and like the last day is here, and the last day, by the way, is something that Jews thought was going to happen. Like this was a Jewish idea that Messiah would come, that God would judge on the last day, and that things would be right? That everything would be right. And a lot of Jewish sects even believed that that people would be raised from the dead on the last day, that the sleeping, those who were asleep, would be raised from the dead. And the thing that was remarkable about Jesus, and the thing that Jews would have understood about Jesus, is that he took something that was supposed to happen at the last day and yanked it into the middle of time, right? he's raised. Not everybody is raised, but that's why the scriptures talk about him as like the firstborn of all creation and the first fruits of the dead, of those who will be raised from the dead. It's because Jesus is like this sign and symbol, the stamp, like the down payment on something that we know is going to happen in the future. That's the power of the resurrection. So we could look at these bodies being raised, the bodies of the saints, it says, not just any bodies, the bodies of the saints that are raised as sort of accompanying evidence that that is what's happening. It's not just Jesus that has been raised, but it's also these other people as a sign and symbol of what will happen to all on that last day, right? Woo.
Oh, I thought that was the bench of the stool.
No.
So the devout Jews would probably understand this the best.
Mm-hmm.
If they were steeped in the Jewish tradition, they would understand this sentence or sentences.
I think so. Yeah. Which makes
Offensive, right? I mean,
well, so
this is
math.
the anti-Semitic gospel. That's what Kirk has been saying in the.
So that's
What is the author's name? Book we're studying in season
Marcus
three?
Borg.
Yeah.
But Matthew is written to Jews,
Yeah.
right?
To Jews, but also the.
It's this is the FUBU gospel, for us by us gospel, but for Jews.
So is this a literary device?
I think that what he's trying to say is the last day has broken into the middle of history, but as clearly as he can say it, right?
But do you think it actually happened, or was he just?
I don't think it really matters.
Because wouldn't the others have written about
They
it? That's kind of a big deal.
they probably would have. They probably would have. And I'd have to do some digging. I've never heard of any, as you said, archaeological evidence or other people writing about this. I haven't looked that hard, if I'm honest, but it hasn't come across my eyes. But others are trying to say the same. Like Luke will make that same argument in a completely different way. Paul will make that argument in a completely different way. They're all trying to say the same things in ways that make sense to them, right? Matthew writing to Jews would make this argument that everybody would understand about Jews, right? People breaking out of their tombs and walking around, and this happens. This accompanies the Messiah. Yeah,
He's writing right after the destruction of Jerusalem.
he is. Yes.
So is he maybe trying to give people hope of resurrection? I think they're going to get better.
For sure. Yes, absolutely. That is the other thing that you got to realize about the Gospels is the only Gospel pretty much that's written before the destruction of the temple is Mark. Mark is the earliest of the Gospels, and he's written somewhere in the ballpark of 60. The temple falls in 70 to the Romans when they come in and sack it. The rest of the Gospels are written after that, and John's is written way after that, like 90. Which gives him a different flavor altogether. And the Revelation, which he also writes, is written late 90. Well, early 90s. Which I'm so excited. I'm going to preach Revelation on May 22nd. By the way, do you guys realize that we've got like a month left of this project? And then we will be done? May 22. Can you believe that? It's amazing. Yeah, we don't have very much time left, which is kind of a bummer, because I've enjoyed it. All right, moving along. Matthew 28. So what happens is that some Marys go to see the tomb, right? There's an earthquake, another earthquake, loving earthquakes in Matthew. And then there is an angel of the Lord, and he is brilliant. This is the passage that we read on Sunday morning. He is all decked out. It's a big-time angelic visitation, and he says what angels always say, which is, don't be afraid. I'm the scariest thing you've ever seen, but don't be afraid. And then later, Jesus comes. They leave with great, what does it say? With fear and great joy, and they run to tell the disciples. And then Jesus shows up, okay? So they show up, and Jesus says the same dang thing. Greetings. Hey. So yeah, we get Mary's, go to the tomb, big time angelic visitation. And by the way, it's not just that the angel shows up. The angel shows up and the tomb rolls away at that very moment. It's, quite a scene. It's dramatic. It's dramatic. Anyway, yeah, go ahead.
I'm confused sometimes about the Marys.
Yes.
Is this other Mary, Mary of Bethany? Is this Mary the mother of Jesus, or is this another Mary?
It is probably in the other Gospels, the other Mary is pointed out as Mary, the mother of James. Yes. So I'm guessing that that's who this Mary is. Okay, so that's what we get, right? Jesus comes to them. There's the whole thing is go tell your brothers, go tell your brothers. Angel. Okay, got it? Mark 16. Now Mark is weird. Mark traditionally ends on kind of a sour note. There is a longer ending to Mark, but it's written much later, and we think it was a tag on from a later editor. So we go with a shorter ending as the most genuine. So in this one, we've got Mary Magdalene, we've got Mary the mother of James, and we've got Salami. No, we've got Salami bringing spices, right? And they get up super duper early, and they're like, who's gonna roll away the stone? And they get there, the stone's already rolled away. They look inside, and there's an angel hanging out, but he's not that scary. He's just dressed he's described as a young man, dressed in a white robe, sitting on the right side, and they're alarmed, right? And he said to them, right, don't be alarmed, but don't be afraid. Pretty much the same diff, right? And he's like, I know who you're looking for. Go tell his disciples. This is always a story. Go tell, go tell, go tell. But it's not like a bunch of fanfare, right? There's no earthquake. There's no angel that descends. The stone doesn't roll back as they stand there, which is just hilarious to me. But they go in. They see this angel. He says, hey, I know who you're looking for. Go tell your disciples. Go tell your brothers what's happened. And this is how it's supposed to end. Well, not necessarily how it's supposed to end, but this is how it does end. Verse 8, they went out and they fled from the tomb for terror and amazement, which is different than fear and great joy in my book that we get in Matthew. Terror and amazement had seized them, and they, instead of went and tell, they said nothing to anyone because they were afraid. That, my friends, is the story you tell before you need to do damage control for the fact that your entire town just got sacked, right? This is 60 CE. This is before Jerusalem has fallen apart. You're not worried about giving this a very rosy hue. You're just like, listen, this was a crazy thing that happened. Jesus was there. He is out there. But these women were freaked out. And of course, it's not just the women. We see this later on in the other Gospels. We see it in Luke. We see it in John, I think, that they're hiding, right? It's not just them in this. Mark just cuts the story short. Mark is really Mark's been called, what do they call it? A passion narrative with an elongated intro. Mark wants you to know that Jesus died.
Could you remind us the significance of Jesus is going to go ahead of you to Galilee? I forget so not in Jerusalem, not in the area, Galilee. Why Galilee?
Home, probably.
Is that home of Jewish people?
I mean, he spent so much of his ministry, it's like going back to his old stomping grounds, right?
Was that part of the tribal state? Like when he went to, what was it, Capernaum, when the woman at the well, that wasn't a highly, that's where a lot of mixed people, Jews and Gentiles,
Right.
married.
Was there a cave up there where he hid out with his disciples?
In Galilee?
A safe place? A safe room?
I don't think so. Not to my mind. Not to my knowledge. I don't know. I'm sure there is some rich symbolism that I'm missing about Galilee, but I don't have it on the top of my head. At any rate, that's Mark. Short, sweet Mark.
Are you saying that you think that Mark downplayed the spread because of the telling of when this was written?
I'm saying that Mark didn't have any compulsion. Also, this is very much Mark's style, right? But the entire Gospel of Mark is like, well, this happened, and then Jesus went here, and then this happened, and when this happened, and he's like moving the story along. That's just his style of writing, but also he wrote before Jerusalem was sacked in 70, right? And that is an incredible thing to happen, that you might want to judge your ending a little bit and include something that's a little more happier than the women ran away because they were afraid and said nothing to anybody. I'm not saying that it's more or less true. I'm just saying he didn't feel the need to add extra stuff.
I guess I just don't understand that, the connection.
Okay, so the connection is the fact that the later edited longer ending has Jesus appearing to Mary Magdalene, it has Jesus appearing to disciples, it has Jesus commissioning those disciples, and it has Jesus ascending into heaven. That's the sort of thing that you might want to go back and tack on the end to a community that's just experienced incredible distress. Yes.
Okay, gotcha.
So why, I mean, wouldn't that have been momentous enough that you would have included it even in a short version?
Maybe, except for Mark just doesn't. Mark doesn't include a lot of things, right? He's the tersest of the gospel writers. Yes.
What was important to him was he died and he wasn't in the tomb, and that's all
Yeah.
I really need to know.
Yep.
He wasn't there.
He died and he wasn't in the tomb.
And he also
Right.
ran away without his clothes, remember?
That's right.
His grave?
Weird detail.
You could, if you looked at that in modern times, you would have written something very differently in Ukraine 6 months ago than you do right now.
For sure. That's exactly right. That's exactly like the power of reading the room, right? Like what is the right thing to say to somebody right now, or what's an appropriate thing to bring up to somebody about their work performance after their dog just died varies, right? That sort of thing. At any rate, Luke 24. Luke has some wonderful stories after the resurrection that are unique to Luke. For instance, the walk to Emmaus, only in Luke, but is a delightful story. But here's what happened. So this doesn't point out any woman in particular. It just says they came to the tomb. The they is there's a whole group of women who have followed Jesus. What does it say?
Down at 10, it delineates a few of the women.
It does.
Yeah, somewhere it says that a bunch of women that actually supported him in his
Correct.
ministry. I forget where.
Yeah, in 23, 27, after they get Simon of Cyrene to take the cross, it says a great number of the people followed him, and among them were the women who were beating their breasts and wailing for them. And he talks to them there. They are mentioned a couple of times, like it must have been a small cadre of women who just followed Jesus around. And took care of stuff like they do now. Yep. Okay, so what happens in 24 is these women come to the tomb, bringing spices, just like in Mark, they were bringing spices to anoint the body. Everybody assumes this guy's dead. Everybody expects to find the body in the tomb, right? So they get there, and the stone was rolled away, and there was nobody in it, and all of a sudden there's not one, but there's two angels. First double angelic visitation here, And they are not just in white robes, like in Mark. They are in dazzling clothes. They were fabulous. And the women were terrified, right? And so I'm just going to read this actually because it's interesting in the way that the story is told. Like the telling of the story is different. But on the first day of the week, at early dawn, they came to the tomb, taking the spices that they had prepared. They found the stone rolled away from the tomb, but when they went in, they did not find the body. While they were perplexed about this, suddenly 2 men in dazzling clothes stood beside them. The women were terrified and bowed their faces to the ground, but the men said to them, Why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here, but has risen. Remember how he told you while he was still in Galilee that the Son of Man must be handed over to sinners and be crucified and on the third day rise again. By the way, you don't know this, but you are all very glad that Luke is not your pastor. Luke loves to preach, and he loves to preach long. Luke is the same writer in Acts, and if you've read some of your Acts readings, you'll see that half of the early parts of Acts are just recitations of sermons that people have given. Luke loves a good sermon. So this angel gives this sermon to these ladies. Remember how he told you while he was still in Galilee that the Son of Man must be handed over to sinners, be crucified, and on the third day rise again. Then they remembered his words, the power of a good sermon. And returning from the tomb, they told all this to the 11 and to all the rest. See how it just it's different. It's a different style. I don't know. I don't know what strikes me differently about it, but it feels narratively different than what the other gospel writers have done. Now it was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and the other women with them who told this to the apostles. But these words seemed to them an idle tale, and they did not believe them. But Peter got up and ran to the tomb. Stooping and looking in, he saw the linen cloths by themselves. Then he went home, amazed at what had happened. Who is oddly absent here? They're the disciples, but more notably, we get no Jesus here, right? Jesus does not show up in this deal, just like in Mark. However, that gives us an entree into the walk to Emmaus, which is a wonderful story about how Jesus walks along with the disciples, and they're just talking about this thing that had happened in Jerusalem, and does he know about it? And he's like, do I know about it? Right? and then they sit down to eat together, and he is breaking the bread and blessing it, and they're like, holy crap, it's Jesus. Right? And then their eyes are opened to who they've been talking. And then he vanishes, and they're like, weren't our hearts burning within us when he was explaining everything that had to happen to the Messiah? How did we not see this in the first place? What are you going to say, Dave?
A question. Is it possible that Luke's writing is different based on the fact that if he was a doctor, would this be accurate? If he were a doctor, wouldn't he be more learned than the average bear and fisherman?
For sure.
Okay, so the sentences are more detailed.
They are.
More complex.
Yes.
I wondered if that's maybe one of the reasons.
That's certainly part of it, I imagine.
And he writes both in Luke and in Acts to Theophilus, who is either an individual or the journal of God-loving people.
Mm-hmm.
From what he says, it sounds like they've been doing a lot of research.
Right.
I've been talking to lots of people
Right.
Which one would assume that he talked to Mary, mother of Jesus, in order to get the whole birth deal, because nobody else got that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. He also is in no trouble or in no hurry to tell all the story right now, right? Because he's got a chapter 2 or a part 2 in Acts.
And it's 80, in the 80s that they think Luke was written.
Yes. Yes.
So that's 20 years after Mark,
Mm-hmm.
45 years after Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And
They're all late.
But the disciples are gone. These are like his stories he had.
So we think these guys were, I mean, the disciples were young men.
But did they live into the 80s then?
They would have only been,
What, 50, if they were 20, they would.
they're 50, right? Yeah, we think it's possible for pretty much everybody but John. John was absolutely written by a school of John's followers. It's possible. Could have. Could have. Yeah, well, you're allowed to be. It doesn't really matter, right? Somebody compiled these, and I mean, it was a mostly oral thing.
Right, well, that's what I figured. It's like if you followed this disciple, like you're hearing those stories, and it's almost like you gotta write these down. Like,
Yeah.
you know.
Sure. Okay, John, really quick. John 20. John is the funniest. Mary Magdalene, early on the first day of the week, while it's still dark, Mary Magdalene is the one that comes, and the stone is removed already. It's not there, but she is so taken by the fact that the stone is rolled away that she runs immediately away, and she goes to tell Peter and the other disciple whom Jesus loved, which is definitely John, right? And she tells them, oh my gosh, somebody's taken the Lord. What are we going to do? We don't know where they've hid him. And Peter and the other disciple set out and went toward the tomb. And the two were running together, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. Come on.
And this is the only place it says that.
This is the only place. It's John's disciples wanted to make a point that he was fast afoot. There's no reason for that to be in there. There's no theological reason for that to be in the Bible, except for somebody was like, exactly. You know, the fact of the matter is that Peter, if you read the Gospels, it's so funny. If you read the Gospels, which all of you have, but if you read them all the way through, you'll notice that in John's Gospel, there is scant individual naming of disciples in the stories. It's pretty much Peter time the entire way through the Gospel of John. It's nuts. It's Peter, everything in the Gospel of John. And a couple other mentions of somebody else. But most of the time it's just Peter. So maybe the writers of John were like, listen, we've given Peter a lot of cred in this Gospel. It's time for John to get his, you know? At any rate. Maybe he was. Maybe that was his thing. He was like kind of a dope, but he was fast. And they're like,
My son was writing this, and he would be the one to say, I got to the tomb first.
for sure. For sure.
The other disciple, yes, the one who wrote this, got there first.
Exactly. And also just how it's written is hilarious. At any rate. So he bent down to look in and saw the linen wrappings lying there, but he didn't go in. And then Simon Peter, following him, went to the tomb, and he saw them lying there, and the cloth that had been lying on Jesus' head, not lying with the linen wrappings, but rolled up in a place by itself. And somebody once told me that meant something about how somebody was going to return to the table or how they were finished. I can't remember. There's something about the linen wrappings that I don't know, but it's only here in John. But it's one of those tiny little textual things that probably meant something culturally that is completely lost to us. I had the same reflection, just a quick side note, I had the same reflection as we were reading on Good Friday through Mark, and they're asking Jesus questions about whether he's the Son of Man or whether he is the Son of God, and he quotes from Daniel, and it sets the high priest off, and he rips his clothes. But if you didn't know that Jesus is quoting Daniel 7 and the return of the one that is like the Son of Man out of the presence of the Almighty, you'd be like, so what? Like, what does that even mean? But if you let those who have ears hear kind of thing, if you know what he's talking about, then you know why the high priest is so bent out of shape. And it's funny things like little things like that in the scripture that you miss unless you're paying really close attention or whether you know the culture of it. And the modern reader just misses a ton of stuff. At any rate.
You know, it would be really interesting to read the New Testament with some Jewish people and like hear what bothers them or rubs them the wrong way or what,
Yeah. Well, you know what? If you want to come to Israel with us next year,
I'll just bug Rabbi Jeff the whole time.
that's right. Just stand by Rabbi Jeff.
Matthew.
Did you ever hear about the Gospel of John?
He was apparently very fast.
He was so fast. Right. Okay, so Mary gets there first. There's no body, there's no angel, right? No body, no angel. Peter and John get there. Nothing in there. Nothing happens. They go home. This is it, right? By the way, we look at this and we're like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. Like, where's Jesus? They expected him to be dead, right? Why doesn't he show up? Well, they expected him to be dead. They'd just be bummed. They wouldn't be like, oh my gosh, he's out and about doing what he said he's going to do. They thought he was dead, right? At any rate.
Of course, with the one question of why are all the linens still there? That they
Correct.
wrapped in?
Correct. That would be awfully strange. But then we have a very lovely encounter with Jesus in the garden with Mary, right? Mary hangs out. She's weeping beside the tomb, and she mistakes Jesus. She's confronted by two angels, and then the Lord comes to her, and she mistakes him for the gardener. But upon hearing her name, she recognizes that it's Jesus, which is John's version of the Emmaus story, right? Where it isn't just that we have this appearance of Christ, but that there is this interaction between Christ and a person that makes Christ alive to them, which is the discussion that I would have loved to have if we had more time, which is, what is it? What is your take on the resurrection? How does it matter that Jesus is resurrected to you? Like, how has the Christ come alive to you? Does it matter if he has a body or not? Did it matter if he was physically raised or not? I tend to think that he was physically raised because the rest of the New Testament makes a big deal out of this, specifically Paul, right? Paul says that if Christ was not raised from the dead, then our faith is in vain, and we are the people most pitied. So Paul makes a big deal out of a physical resurrection of Jesus. Yeah.
Why were the disciples so surprised?
I think they were good Jews, and they thought that if somebody was going to be raised from the dead, that this was going to be the last day, and that everything was going to change. They never expected that thing to happen in the middle of time.
Had he not said, I will be raised from the third day?
He made veiled references to it.
Say the temple though.
3 times?
He predicted his own death a lot. But all right, we'll pick this up next week. Actually, we could keep talking about Jesus' resurrection.
To know how, if he came to just those people,
Mm-hmm.
but all of the higher-ups had said to the guards, tell the people this, because we don't want them to think Jesus was raised, we want them to think he was stolen.
Mm-hmm.
How did all these other masses of people come to believe?
There are other. So the Gospels will go on to say that Jesus appeared to a bunch of other people. Like 500, I think, is the count, right?
So that's not very many.
In a small town it is. Think about how many people lived in Jerusalem in non-Passover times, right? These aren't huge
20 people were like, I saw it.
Right, right.
You know.
Anyway, grace and peace to you. We'll see you next time.
Mary was present.
Correct. If you take any, Mary was present. Mary Magdalene shows up. She's dependable.